the story of the Incorruptibles. And to begin explaining what it is, I want to show you two short cases. The first is the incorruptible Padre Pio. He was an Italian Capucine priest, bearer of the stigmatas, the mythical wounds of Christ, and already by life he was surrounded by numerous wonders. And on March 2008, the body of Padre Pio was exhumed from 30 years after his death from its crypt, so the remains could be displayed. And a church statement described the body as being in fair condition. And the local archbishop, a papal legate to the shrine of San Giovanni Rotondo, where he belongs, stated that, and I quote, "The top part of the skull is partial skeletal, but the chin is perfect and the rest of the body is well preserved." The second case is Bernadette Soubirous from France. She is very famous, of course, because she is said to have numerous apparitions of the Virgin Mary until 1858, and she got the message from the Holy Mother about the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. And in 1909 the first exhumation takes place. There was one official of the church, two doctors and several sisters of Nevers, the convent where she had lived until her death in 1866. And I quote from the records, "On opening the lid they discerned no odor, and the virginal body lay exposed, completely victorious over the law of nature. Although the clothing was damp and sawdust, the arms and face were completely unaffected and had maintained their natural skin tone. The teeth were barely visible through the slightly parted lips, and the eyes appeared somewhat sunken. Her perfect hands held a rosary that has become rusty, and the crucifix that lay upon her breast was coated." And then at 1919 the second exhumation took place, and then they placed the wax mass on her face, and they put her body in a coffin of gold and glass here in Nevers, and she looks a bit like Walt Disney's Snow White. She has to be kissed by her prince and wake up again, but that will probably be Christ itself on the last day. But the Incorruptibles are those to be canonized Catholics whose bodies have not decayed after their physical death, without any intentional means or artificial conservation. And the last phrase is the difficult one, of course. I will give you a short history of the Incorruptibles, and the classical Logos Theologicus is found in Psalm 15, which says, "I will not suffer my faithful one to undergo corruption." And the explanation of to be canonized saints is a very old habit within the Catholic tradition, as the Congregation of the Causes of the Saints has declared in 2005 in the document "The New Procedures in the Rite of Beatification," and I quote, "In the first millennium of the Church's existence, the cult of martyrs and later of confessors of the faith was regulated by the various particular churches. On occasion of a synod, the bishop would authorize a new particular cult that had begun with the elevation or translatio corporis, that the body was exhumed and transferred, and these acts subsequently became known as the episcopal canonization because they involved directly unto the local church." So it's a very old tradition. We have two important writers I want just to mention you, the Herbert Thurston and Benedict XIV. To begin with the second one, the Pope, he wrote in 1734 a big book, the Beatificatione Servorum Dei et de Candidatione Beatorum, and he put in two capita over De Cadaverum Incorruptione. I don't have to translate that, I think. Two capita over De Cadaverum Incorruptione, and in which he declares very firmly that the heroic sanctity must have been established, and that no natural cause of incorruption must be traceable, and the body remains intact after exposure to the air and the light of day, and then we can say safely that a miracle has happened. Herbert Thurston, a Belgian Jesuit, writing in 1952, The Physical Phenomena of Mysticism, is a bit more skeptical. His book contains not mysticism as we understand it nowadays, but it's an inquiry on the paranormal phenomenon often associated with sainthood, like levitation, stigmata, telekinese, the odor of sanctity, seeing without eyes, living without eating, the multiplication of food, and the absence of cadaveric rigidity and incorruption. And Thurston lists 6 categories of phenomenon which can occur under the term of incorruption. No, not yet. Fragrance perceived in the neighborhood of the body of the deceased, a complete absence of cadaveric rigor, immunity for natural decay, bleeding of venerated corpses after an interval, persistence of warmth long after the life appears to be extinct, and, most of all, an interesting most not, raising of limbs in benediction or to be venerated. So corpses have been reported to raise their hands after death and making a blessing sign. Then the causes. I want to touch them lightly. There are 3 causes which can be made up. The natural causes. The conditions are such that decomposition is significantly slowed down, in cool and dry burial grounds, for example. We have the supernatural causes. It's a miracle of God and has nothing to do with men. Or the artificial causes. Body has been embalmed on purpose. Then Thurston again, we just heard about him, and I quote, "If it's natural or supernatural, I cannot say. But if it were admitted that all these phenomena that are at times found to occur spontaneously and naturally, without any presumption of the intervention of a miracle, still the high proportion of such cases amongst those who have lived the life of heroic virtue cannot possibly be explained as the result of mere coincidence." So the vast amount of reported cases is a proof of the existence of the supernatural phenomena. There are, of course, critics who claim this phenomenon to be pious fraud. And I'm quoting Joe Nichol in his book, Looking for a Miracle, Weeping Icons, Relics, Stigmata, Visions, and so on and so forth, at 1993. The faces and hands of Bernadette, we just saw her as a second case, that looked so real are made out of wax. The wax was added because the face was destroyed when the body was first exhumed. Perhaps Saint Bernadette's corpse should be moved to Madame Tussauds, the famous museum in Amsterdam. Some of these alleged saintly incorruptibles have exuded a sweet odor when exhumed. The faithful take this as a sign of divine intervention. But Joe Nichol thinks it's more a sign of the embalming fluids and anointments you smell, which have been used to preserve the corpse. So nothing special, nothing supernatural is there. Eventually, I'm not interested in proving or disproving any of these causes. I am more interested in the theological narratives which these bodies do communicate. But first, I want to say some briefly about incorruptibility and the sainthood. And both Thurston and Benedict XVI make it very clear that not all incorruptibles are saints, and not all saints are incorruptible. The miracles don't make the man a saint makes the miracle. And the physical miracles are meaningless without a holy life. This is because the spontaneous incorruptibility can also be found outside Roman Catholic tradition. So we as Roman Catholics would make sure that the only true incorruptibles are the Roman Catholic ones, of course. Now I'm ending with the major point of my lecture, the theological notions or stories or narratives these incorruptibles embody in the eyes of the devotees. The devotees put meaning, put story onto these incorruptible bodies. And first of all, I want to make the apologetical story. These bodies are used, as you have seen in the little movie, as a proof of the truth of Roman Catholicism. Especially in more pious or traditionalistic circles within the Roman Catholic Church, the existence of the incorruptibles is used to prove the higher truth of the Catholic faith, and scientific criticism of natural causes or pious frauds is thought of as a secular attack on the Christian faith. And the problem with this part of the story of the Incorruptibles is the paradox of defending your faith against empiric criticism by making use of the same empiric paradigm. And I wouldn't advise anyone to use the Incorruptibles as an apologetical proof. Anthropological, the second one, the unity between body and soul. The church of the first millennium has heavily debated with various Gnostic groups on subjects such as dualistic or monistic essence of reality. The theologians of what is now called the orthodoxy underline the unbreakable unity between body and soul, as well in all of us and in Jesus Christ himself, having the two natures. The various debates on the incarnation led to a Christian anthropology in which the body is valued greatly. The optimistic anthropology is backed up, so to speak, by these incorruptibles. The body is not something without value, not something to be tossed away after the soul has departed after physical death. The human person does not only have a body, but at the same time is his or her body. Of course, at the same time, there is a larger brand within Christianity, especially within the Roman Catholic tradition, tending to rigorism and asceticism. The great monks of Egypt and Syrian desert were quite convinced that the body was a merger of vices, which has to be overcome by means of extreme discipline and spiritualization. And it's interesting that no case of incorruptibility is reported from that time and age, while the natural environment of a desert makes it the perfect place for natural mummification. But no report has been found from that time of age, because the desert monks were not interested in the body, because the body was something to be overcome. The third notion or narrative is the eschatological, a promise of the rising of all of our spiritualized body, as Paul calls it. The Apostle Paul speaks about a near future in which our departed souls will receive a new spiritualized body. Within the same anti-Gnostic debate, this Pauline statement has been used to emphasize the paradox corporality of our life in heaven. The Apostolic Creed let the faithful declare, and I quote, "I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of the saints, the forgiveness of the sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting." And the resurrection of the body is a promise, a gift to be granted at the end of history. The Incorruptibles have received, in a certain way, this gift already ahead of us, and therefore they're a promise to us. And they remind the faithful who gather round their coffins that they will receive the same gift when we die, although in a spiritualized form. The monks of the desert, although dualistic in their physical rigorism, tend to idolize the experienced monk to have already obtained death while still alive. For desert fathers as Evagrius Ponticus and John Climacus, this dying is not something negative but uttermost positive. While alive, they experience death. They have brought their body in so under control that they experience death already when they are alive, and that's nothing something negative. That's something positive, because in their life they can experience in that way the celestial bliss of God's paradise. I'm not one of those who like that way, but all right. Christological. The Incorruptibles are seen as a sign of Christ's victory over death. Faithful gathered around the Incorruptibles, they mirror the partial victory over death by these saints with the supreme victory of Christ over death itself. Christ was risen from the grave, the Bible tells so, in body and soul. And the numerous stories in the New Testament about Jesus being touched or eating with his disciples are all aimed to assure the reader that Christ's resurrected self was not something as a soul on the loose, or a ghost, or one of the phantasmata. The reality of the physical resurrection that of Christ's body, has been seen within theological tradition as a very important fact of resurrection. While not being absolutely necessary for the theological reality of the resurrection of Christ, its physical component has always been used as some kind of proof for this metaphysical happening. When I was discussing on the internet that the physical component of the resurrection was not necessary, I was charged with heresy, which happened quite a lot. And then the last one remark I will make, and then I can conclude, is the ecclesiological narrative, the unity of the communion of the saints. In the same section of the Apostolic Creed about the Spirit, the Church, and the last things, in which the notion of the resurrection of the body can be found, one can read the phrase, "I believe in the communion of the saints." This communion of the saints has been misinterpreted, often in Christianity, as if it would point exclusively to the group of canonized men and women. The term saint, however, is often used, especially in the Pauline corpus, as an equivalent to Christian. Of course, in an eschatological sense. We are holy because of Christ, but we have to work hard to become what we truly are by vocation. The communion of the saints exists therefore of Christians who have lived, who are living now, and who will live once before the end of times. Exists of both those who are or will be proclaimed a saint and those who are not. And this continuity between generations of faithful, between heaven and earth, are embodied by these incorruptibles. As I said before, I will not suffer my faithful one to undergo corruption. And therefore I will conclude the story of the incorruptibles is first of all the story of our individual hope of an eternal life. Thank you very much for your attention.